Thank you for listening to A History of World War II, Episode 1, Post-World War I Europe and the Early Years of the Nazi Party. World War II certainly was one of the pivotal events of the 20th century. It redefined human cruelty, but also embodied amazing courage and compassion. It gave rise to some of the greatest villains and their atrocities, but it also allowed heroes to demonstrate immeasurable depths of kindness. This is the story of the people who endured and those who did not. Between Hitler mindlessly slaughtering the people held in German-occupied territories and the Allies bombing the civilians who made Germany's war machine possible, I hope to convey the sheer tragedy that is war. War will never again be as clear-cut to its participants or as controllable by those who sit around a table of maps. As amazing as the story itself is, the effects of it stretched on for many years after. While an unbelievable 60 million people died during World War II, it was followed by and in part caused the Korean War, where another 4 million people died. At the end of the battle, with the Allied armies facing each other across the city of Berlin, their common enemy destroyed, the Republic and Communist governments' distrust of each other led directly to the Cold War, which meant 50 years or so of everyone waiting for the next World War, with its new and deadlier weapons. The Third Reich of Nazi Germany lasted just over 12 years, from January 1933 to May 1945. It was called the Thousand-Year Reich by its creators, and even though it fell far short of that description, those dozen years would necessitate the rebuilding of cities, countries, and hundreds of millions of lives. So how did Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini come to power, rebuild their armies, and menace the world without being confronted until it was too late? Why didn't the leaders of the other European countries try to stop them before war broke out, when they were still militarily weak? Didn't Hitler spell out exactly what he wanted to do in his book, Mein Kampf, his blueprint for a Nazi revolution? He had already tried to take control of the government by force in November of 1923, in the infamous Beer Hall Putsch. And even when it failed, and he was tried, convicted, and imprisoned in April of 1924, he used the courtroom as a pulpit to attack the German Republic's government and the Versailles Treaty with such passion that he became a hero to many and a national figure. To attempt to get an understanding, one must know what Germany and Europe were like in the pre-World War II era, or more correctly, the post-World War I era. President Woodrow Wilson and the European leaders assumed that bringing democracy to Germany after World War I would end future German aggression. The autocrat Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate his German throne, which was fine with many different political parties in Germany at the time who were ready for a change. The Social Democrats, a moderate middle-class political party, was put in charge of the government by the German army's leaders, Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff, at the end of World War I, to appease the victorious Allies. A republic was announced by the Social Democrats, but it became quickly apparent that the leading officers in the army, upper castes in society, and the industrial leaders would not support a republic. Honestly, it never had a chance. Since things remained unstable politically, there was a real fear of a communist revolution. Those who desired communism as an answer to the country's problems took their frustrations to the streets, and the army only fought back when asked by the Social Democrats, which wasn't always. The communist threat remained until ruthlessly wiped out by the Nazis when they came to power. On July 31st, 1919, the German Reichstag, or Parliament, passed the Weimar Constitution, and the new republic was born. The Constitution was a very liberal work for its time. It borrowed ideas like a cabinet government from England, a strong president from the U.S., and representation of minorities in a parliament. One reason for such a constitution was Germany's attempt to deal with their defeat as best they could. They assumed that getting rid of the Kaiser, defending against communism, and drafting a modern constitution would help their cause when it came time for the victorious Allies to draw up their demands, who still had mobilized armies facing Germany. Those demands were listed in the Treaty of Versailles and were very reasonable considering they had to fight German aggression twice within living memory. It was released in Berlin on May 7, 1919, to an outraged Germany. It must be said that Germany could have been dealt with much more harshly, like they dealt with Russia and others who were defeated by them in World War I. But what brought huge crowds of Germans together demanding the treaty not be signed was a clause that Germany would admit guilt in starting the war, and Kaiser Wilhelm II would be handed over to the Allies. Reparations would be figured out in the future, But another deal breaker for German pride was that Germany would be mostly disarmed. Again, a very reasonable clause from the other nations tired and still fearful of its strong Germany. The German provisional government of Weimar did not want to sign this humiliating document, and they had the support of the people. But when the German generals were asked if they could defend Germany if the treaty was not signed, they admitted they could not. The politicians, relieved that the decision was made by the military, voted and told the German delegation to sign the treaty. But it would not be too long before this was forgotten, and the republic that signed the treaty received all the blame and anger from its citizens. Hitler would certainly see to that.